Hello guys, welcome back to LR Anime. Today is explanation of Renegade Immortal episode number 63 based on novel. So let's start. But it was too late. Earlier, when Wang Lin took out the puppet, he made a decision. Right now, he was at the point of life and death. The old woman was clearly not an early-stage soul formation cultivator, she was very likely at the peak of the mid-stage. This old woman's techniques must contain her domain, so if he were to get caught, it would be too dangerous. The gap between their cultivation levels was too large, so even if he ran, he wasn't any faster. Wang Lin's eyes became decisive as he made a decision. He had to finish this quickly, or else once the other Xueyu cultivators arrive, it will be very hard to escape. He had to take victory as quickly as possible before the old woman considered him a threat. Wang Lin didn't hesitate at all. The moment he threw out the nascent soul puppet, he took a deep breath and a thin thread slowly came out of his hand. The sliver of divine retribution. In addition to this, he could also hide inside the heaven-defying bead. However, that was his last resort because he would rather use this sliver of divine retribution than allow the old woman to see the heaven-defying bead. The heaven-defying bead was his most well-kept secret and shouldn't be exposed. But if he didn't have this sliver of divine retribution, he would have no choice but to enter the heaven-defying bead. Wang Lin used the moment the old woman was dazed by the G realm to activate the sliver of divine retribution. This sliver of divine retribution was Wang Lin's ace that had helped him survive many crises, but in order to live, he still used it today. It wasn't that he didn't consider using it to threaten her, it was because there were many Xueyu cultivators here. He could threaten her, but once she leaves and brings back more cultivators, he would be in a very dangerous situation. So the ideal situation was to kill her with the sliver of divine retribution before she even realized it. Although he felt a bit heartbroken when using it, Wang Lin was not an indecisive person. The sliver of divine retribution disappeared and red clouds appeared in the sky. These clouds appeared very mysteriously. In almost an instant, the red clouds covered the sky. As for the dark blue aura, it really couldn't compare to the red cloud. The dark blue aura moved out of the way of the red clouds as if it didn't dare to block their path. This was the scene the old woman saw once she recovered from Wang Lin's attack. She didn't immediately recognize what this was, but the moment she saw the red clouds, she felt fear, so she didn't hesitate to hide inside the ice tower. At this moment, the white-robed red butterfly looked at the red clouds with a curious gaze. The sickly middle-aged man behind her suddenly became very alert. His sickly look completely disappeared as he stared at the red clouds. He didn't say a word. He completely ditched his job of protecting Red Butterfly to go to the red clouds. Wang Lin's face was pale and his right hand trembled as he watched the old woman escape to the ice tower. His eyes lit up as he controlled the red clouds and pointed at the ice tower. Suddenly, a bolt of red lightning appeared in the red clouds. This red lightning was unbelievably fast. At almost the exact same moment it appeared, it landed on the ice tower. That sliver of red lightning seemed to have triggered the rest of the clouds. Sounds of friction could be heard inside the clouds as red lightning gathered to form a bolt of purple lightning that was as thick as an arm before crashing down from the sky. The old woman was about to dodge inside the ice tower when she realized that her surroundings were locked down by a destructive force, making her unable to move. A look of despair appeared on her face. She never would have expected to attract divine retribution when she went to chase a mere nascent soul junior. No matter how dumb she was, she realized that this was the mythical divine retribution. The purple divine retribution smashed down on the ice tower. The ice tower and the old woman disappeared without a trace. It was as if they had never existed. Wang Lin took a deep breath and directed another regrettable look at the divine retribution. But he knew that this was not the time to linger, so he turned around and escaped. But after moving just 100 feet, he noticed a powerful divine sense sweep by him. At that moment, the straw hat on his head glowed and that divine sense quickly retreated. Suddenly, hot energy emanated from the straw head and entered his head. It showed the image of the middle-aged man who destroyed the dragon rapidly approaching. Wang Lin was terrified and had no time to be amazed at the straw hat's ability. He quickly pointed his finger at his brow and disappeared into the heaven-defying bead space. After the purple divine retribution lightning destroyed the ice tower and old woman, it began to dissipate slowly. The red clouds in the sky also began to disperse, but just at this moment, the middle-aged man from Suzaku arrived. His eyes looked crazed as he stared at the red cloud. Then he let out a roar and an unimaginable aura spread from his body. Suddenly, the dissipating red cloud began to move again. It was as if it were trying to condense once more. However, without that sliver of divine retribution to guide it, the red cloud could no longer condense again. The middle-aged man was extremely worried about the red cloud. He knew that this was an extremely rare chance for him. If he were to miss this chance, he didn't know if he would ever encounter something this good in his life again. However, the red clouds could no longer condense and he could only watch as they dissipated. It was like seeing a mountain of gold and silver before you, but as you reached out to grab it, you noticed that there was an uncrossable gap between it and you. Anxious, the middle-aged man bit his finger and drew blood symbols. The symbols flew out one by one into the red clouds. Gradually, more and more blood symbols entered the red clouds. Finally, the speed at which the red cloud was dissipating seemed to slow down. The middle-aged man relaxed for a moment before his face became ugly again. The red clouds were already very weak and about to disappear, but they were stabilized by the blood symbols. However, the dark blue aura suddenly rushed in as it was now stronger and sped up the dissipation of the red clouds. Seeing the red clouds quickly dissipate until there was only one left, the middle-aged man let out an angry roar as he charged into the middle of it. The moment his body entered the red cloud, bolts of purple lightning entered his body. He felt pain, but was also very comfortable as the lightning struck him. However, this only lasted for a very short period of time as the red cloud quickly dissipated. The middle-aged man stared dumbfoundedly at the sky, his face very gloomy. Earlier, when his divine sense swept by, he only found the ice tower and a golden glow. The glow caused his divine sense to feel pain, so he pulled back. Afterward, he couldn't feel that golden glow anymore. After pondering for a bit, he clasped his hands and shouted, "Fellow cultivator who attracted the divine retribution, I am Ouji from Suzaku. I would like to ask fellow cultivator to attract the divine retribution again. I will reward you handsomely." After a long time and still no response, the middle-aged man let out a sigh. He reached out and grabbed the air. There was a scream as a giant arm covered in blue aura flew toward him. The arm landed in his hand and then turned to dust. The snake creature only had one arm left. Red Butterfly's expression was calm, but there was a hidden trace of anger. The middle-aged man let out a cold snort and slowly said, "If it wasn't for this damn beast ruining my fortune, then I would have been able to complete my technique today. I'm already very generous in taking only one arm." Red Butterfly, remember this well. Red Butterfly didn't speak. The seven behind her only dared to be silently angry. They didn't utter a word. The middle-aged man moved. When he reappeared, he was behind Red Butterfly. He once again looked very sickly. Almost all of the cultivators of the Four-Sect Alliance died in the year after the battle. Only a few were lucky enough to remain hidden in the new Shueyu. Time slowly passed. After living here for a year, Red Butterfly followed the middle-aged man to Suzaku. As for the rain cauldron, no matter how much the cultivators of Shueyu searched, they couldn't find it. They believed that it was in the hands of the surviving Four-Sect Alliance cultivators. After Shueyu took over the country, massive amounts of mortals from the original Shueyu migrated over. Snow continued to fall, causing the new Shueyu to be forever cold. One by one, ice towers unique to Shueyu appeared. After 3 years, this land completely belonged to Shueyu. Time quickly passed. 5 years later, at a place 30,000 kilometers from the boundary of Shueyu, a rainbow-colored light gradually condensed. It was Wang Lin. The heaven-defying bead had undergone a mysterious change after absorbing the earth spirit. Before, it would have been impossible for him to stay inside for 5 years. But after the earth element was completed, the amount of time Wang Lin could spend inside was far longer than before. A big change was that the heaven-defying space now had some spiritual energy inside. There was none in there before. This spiritual energy was much more pure than the spiritual energy outside. Although Wang Lin had never felt celestial spiritual energy, he felt that the spiritual energy inside the bead was a bit less pure than celestial spiritual energy. In addition to all of this, the most important change was that all of the small light sources inside the heaven-defying bead had gathered together and formed 5 large masses of light in the sky. Among the 5 masses of light, 3 of them are glowing brightly, 1 of them was only glowing slightly, and the last one was very dim, without any color. Wang Lin had spent the years inside the heaven-defying bead observing the masses of light. With his perception, he realized that these 5 masses of light were related to the elements. It was very likely that these 5 masses of light were made of the elemental energy gathered by the heaven-defying bead. The 3 brightly glowing ones were the water, earth, and fire elements. The half-glowing one was the wood element. As for the completely dim light, it was the metal element. In the years Wang Lin had spent observing the heaven-defying bead, he got a very mysterious feeling from the lights. It was as if they were alive. If someone whose cultivation level was higher than Wang Lin's was inside the bead, they would have a hard time noticing this. Wang Lin was able to notice this while he was cultivating his own life and death domain. During a moment of enlightenment, he was able to detect life inside the masses of light. This discovery suddenly increased his interest in the masses of light. Sichu Nan once said that the appearance of the heaven-defying bead caused all of the top cultivators in Suzaku and even cultivators from other planets to come and fight for it. After losing his body, his nascent soul escaped into the heaven-defying bead and barely survived. After a series of events, he was able to escape those cultivators. After many years, the bead ended up inside the stomach of a bird and then found by Wang Lin. Wang Lin has had this heaven-defying bead for more than 400 years, but he still hadn't managed to figure out its true function. In his view, this bead could only alter time to a certain degree and could change normal water to one with spiritual energy. These abilities were very useful for cultivators below the soul formation stage, but they weren't all that useful to soul formation and above cultivators. After all, for cultivators past the soul formation stage, the spiritual energy in the mortal world is no longer pure enough to cultivate with. Only celestial spiritual energy can be used, so this spiritual energy of the mortal world really wasn't that attractive to them. Making water with spiritual energy and time altering were somewhat useful, but with just these abilities, it didn't seem right for the top cultivators of Suzaku and other planets to come and fight for the bead. Wang Lin believed that this heaven-defying bead definitely had to have other uses. Why else would all those powerful cultivators fight over it? Sichu Nan had said before that after years of studying, he believed that the heaven-defying bead would only show its true nature once the 5 elements were complete. Maybe at that point, it will finally reveal a bit of its power. Wang Lin's interest for the true power of the heaven-defying bead not only didn't diminish with time, but he became even more interested. He even had a hope that the 5 masses of light would become like the 5 elemental spirits the white-robed woman had. Of course, this was all just speculation. Wang Lin stood in the new Shuiyu and let out a sigh. Aside from studying the 5 masses of light, the rest of his time was spent cultivating his life and death domain. He had spent more than 10 years inside the heaven-defying bead, but for some reason, when he was cultivating his life and death domain, the time-altering power of the heaven-defying space had lost its use. 5 years had passed outside. No matter how much time would pass inside the bead, it was still 5 years to his domain. This point puzzled Wang Lin greatly. At this moment, Wang Lin felt his own cultivation level. He would only need to cultivate his domain for 4 more years before he finally reaches the soul formation stage. Wang Lin believed that once he reaches the soul formation stage, if he were to meet that mid-stage soul formation old woman, he will be able to put up a fight even without the divine retribution. Wang Lin was forced to leave the heaven-defying bead space. Even with all the changes, 5 years was the limit. For a while, Wang Lin won't be able to stay inside for that long. Wang Lin let out a sigh. Instead of flying, he slowly walked forward. He put the straw hat away and slowly walked on an ice field. The snow raged and the cold air tried to invade his body every time he took a deep breath. After a long time, he saw an ice city in the distance. In the center of the city was a 30-plus floor ice tower with a bead that emitted a mysterious light. The land under his feet now belonged to the new Shuiyu, so he really didn't have any right to intervene in this matter. He only wanted to find a quiet place to spend the next 4 years to reach the soul formation stage. When Wang Lin arrived in the ice city, he looked no different from a mortal. Shuiyu also had mortals. After they had migrated to the new land, they built new cities with the help of the cultivators. Wang Lin silently appeared inside the city. As he looked at all the ice houses, he couldn't help but feel like he was in a foreign place. There weren't many people walking around outside and there weren't many inns or restaurants. The most common sight in the city were ice sculpture shops. Outside almost every house there was someone carving a giant block of ice with a chisel, creating very rough ice sculptures. There was something strange about these people. Along the way, no one talked at all. They were all either hurrying to somewhere or focused on carving the ice. Also, whenever an ice sculpture was completed, all of the nearby mortals would help move it to the ice tower. After leaving the ice sculptures there, someone from the tower would come out to accept it. Wang Lin pondered a little. His appearance seemed a bit out of place, so others were already taking notice of him. He let out a sigh and turned to leave. Once he reached a secluded area, he disappeared. In the blink of an eye, 1 year passed. During this year, Wang Lin had traveled all over Shuiyu and had entered almost every city. People no longer paid much attention to him as he started dressing like other Shui mortals after going into the first city. He was now wearing clothes made out of animal fur and a fizzled animal hat. Wang Lin learned a lot about Shui during his 1 year here. The mortals of Shui existed only to create ice sculpture for cultivators. They created ice sculptures to exchange for what they needed to live. There were no royal families or anything similar to them in Shui. Instead, each city belonged to a powerful cultivator. Wang Lin had figured out what the use for those ice sculptures in this past year. The cultivators would take them, place a formation on them, and then use a special technique to bring them to life, making them into something like a puppet. This method was very mysterious. It required the use of the core essence of the Shui cultivators. Wang Lin had studied it for a long time and still wasn't able to learn anything. As for the ice sculptures themselves, a large amount of them were sold to other countries. Their prices varied depending on the cultivation level the ice sculptures displayed. The most expensive ice sculptures were nascent soul level. Wang Lin had only seen a few being made in all the cities he had visited. The failure rate to make one was extremely high. As for soul formation ice sculptures, Wang Lin still hadn't found a city that could produce one. Those types of puppets were probably very hard to produce, or even impossible. If they could easily make them, then the power of the Shui cultivators would reach an unimaginable level. In this year, Wang Lin had witnessed 3 occasions where a large number of ice sculptures was bought by another rank 4 country. These ice sculptures required a large amount of materials to make, but they were the foundation of Shui's infrastructure, so no expenses were spared. In addition to all of this, there was large amount of mortals starting to mine at the spirit veins in this land. It can be said that the mortals were slaves as everything they did was to serve the cultivators. What baffled Wang Lin the most was that the mortals felt proud doing this. They weren't rejecting this type of treatment. Even if they were being overworked, there were no complaints. Wang Lin had come to a conclusion after spending a year here. Shui was a very strange country. There was one more thing that shocked Wang Lin. All of the mortals carried a small ice sculpture with them. These ice sculptures were connected to the most powerful cultivator in their respective cities. No matter how tired they were or even if they were dying, every morning and evening they would take out the small ice sculpture to pray. They would kneel on the ground with complete devotion. All of these unbelievable things caused Wang Lin to have a very strange feeling about Shui. This country, much like the snow and ice covering it, had no signs of vigor or life. The sky was the same as well. There was this dull feeling everywhere he went. After a year of traveling, Wang Lin picked a small city. Although he didn't like this city, the ice sculpture technique had really caught his attention. Wang Lin made wood carvings, so if he could learn this technique and use it on wood carvings, he would have another weapon. In addition to this, there was another important reason that made Wang Lin not want to leave this place. The mortals here had no life in them, which was a very strange thing. Wang Lin believed that he would gain a better understanding of death here. Wang Lin settled down in a small city near the northern border of Shui. There weren't many people in this city and the cultivator controlling it was at the late stage of core formation. This cultivator disappeared without a trace 2 nights after Wang Lin arrived. However, no one but Wang Lin knew of his disappearance. On the 3rd day, Wang Lin disguised himself as this person and walked out of the ice tower that only had 11 floors. Wang Lin had already used his power as a soul devourer to steal all the memories of this late-stage core formation cultivator. Instead of killing him, he took control of him and locked him inside a formation, in case he becomes useful later on. Originally, with this cultivator's cultivation level, he wouldn't have the right to own an ice tower, but his uncle had some power in Shui, so he was assigned this small town and an ice tower. Through this person's memories, Wang Lin learned that the genius of Shui was named Red Butterfly and that she had left with a cultivator of Suzaku a few years ago. Along with the 7 Grand Elders that left, 13 more cultivators who were even older than the Grand Elders had gone as well. They went to Suzaku to accept the empowerment ceremony. The request Red Butterfly had for joining Suzaku was to make Shui a rank 5 cultivation country and to give them a new home. The second request had been completed. Now there was only the first one remaining. All of the cultivators in Shui knew a bit about this, but because of this cultivator's uncle, he knew even more than usual. For a rank 4 cultivation country to rise up to rank 5, a cultivator in that country would have to reach the soul transformation stage. The empowerment ceremony was a very powerful and heaven-defying technique. Everyone only had one shot at it with a very high chance to fail. However, if it succeeded, then that person would reach the soul transformation stage. The only downside was that no matter how much life that person had, they would only have 100 years left to live. Also, that person's cultivation level will be forever stuck at the early stage of soul transformation. There was no way to change this. They will only have 100 years to live, and once that passes, they will die. As a result, this was also a chance for those who were stuck at late stage of soul formation. After all, they didn't have much life left, so it was worth a shot. As long as one of the 13 people were successful, Suzaku would give Xueyu the privileges of a rank 5 cultivation country for 100 years. During those 100 years, one of the 7 Grand Elders that followed Red Butterfly will reach the soul transformation stage, thus solidifying their position as a rank 5 cultivation country. This was something Suzaku had promised Red Butterfly at he 4 surrounding rank 4 cultivation countries had all accepted their fates and were ready to become subjects of Xueyu. These were rules left by the Cultivation Union rather than Suzaku. Any country can rebel, but they can't change anything as the price of rebellion is to be wiped out. Wang Lin walked out of the ice tower and saw 2 Foundation establishment cultivators outside. One was male and the other female. The moment they saw Wang Lin, they knelt down and paid their respects to their teacher. Wang Lin silently nodded. Wang Lin knew that this person has 3 disciples and that this small beauty was the youngest. She was also the most spoiled and had a secret relationship with the cultivator Wang Lin was disguised as. This type of thing was very rare between masters and disciples in other cultivation countries. Even if it were to happen, it would be a well-kept secret. But in this incredible country, it was a very common thing. According to this cultivator's memories, there were many other cultivators in Xueyu who had relationships with their disciples. These types of thing had become so common that no one looked down on people who did it. This cultivator had once even complained that if Red Butterfly wasn't so blessed by the heavens, she would have had to serve her master as well. Wang Lin could only bitterly smile at this matter. It caused his opinion of Xueyu become even worse. As for the male disciple, although he looked old, he was the second oldest. He showed respect to his master on the surface, but he really hated his master's relationship with his junior apprentice sister. Wang Lin obtained all of this information from the core formation cultivator, who originally planned to send this male disciple away so he won't be such an eyesore. With a hand behind his back and a very neutral voice, Wang Lin slowly asked, "Have any new ice embryos arrived?" Ice embryos were what the Xueyu cultivators called the ice sculptures. The second disciple quickly answered, "Master, 2 of them just arrived." Wang Lin gently nodded and said, "Take them out and let me see if the 2 of you have improved your technique." Wang Lin obtained a very detailed description of the method from the cultivator's memories. From his point of view, this technique was related to the core of Xueyu cultivators and was very intricate. In addition to spiritual energy, Xueyu cultivators also absorb cold energy from the snow when they cultivate. This cold energy is something they must absorb because it allows them to leave their bodies to form ice giants when they reach the nascent soul stage. However, this technique has levels and is not easy to obtain. The cultivator Wang Lin captured only had the first 4 levels, and that's only because he had learned it secretly. The second disciple quickly nodded and took out 2 3-feet-tall ice sculptures from his bag of holding. The 2 sculptures were of a creature with the body of a bird and head of a human. It looked very ferocious. After a year of traveling, Wang Lin knew that this was an ice sculpture of one of Xueyu's guardian creatures, the snow fairy. The second disciple focused his gaze and cultivated for a bit. Then his left hand formed multiple seals until a ball of black blood formed. He pointed at the ball of blood and broke off a sliver of it. He then pushed the sliver into the ice sculpture. Suddenly, black smoke spewed from his finger and entered the ice sculpture, creating a mark that looked like a vein. The second disciple's forehead was covered in sweat. He took a deep breath, picked out another sliver of blood, and pushed it into the ice sculpture. Suddenly, a second vein appeared in the ice sculpture. At this point, the ball of blood on the second disciple's hand silently disappeared. His face was pale as he quickly sat down to cultivate. Wang Lin's expression was calm, but he secretly managed to find out a bit more about the technique. According to the memories of the cultivator, the requirement to complete the first step was to put 9 blood veins in the snow fairy. Just as he was thinking this, the female disciple walked up to him. She looked at him with her pretty eyes and whispered, "Master, you haven't answered my question from a few days ago, so disciples' cultivation is having problems. Please come and instruct me tonight." Wang Lin was still considering the blood vein, so he casually nodded and said, "Speak, what issue?" The female disciple was suddenly startled and looked around. Her face became red as she charmingly asked, "Talk about it here?" Wang Lin nodded, but he suddenly remembered something from the cultivator's memories. There was another meaning to this disciple's question. Thinking about this, Wang Lin was about to speak, but the female disciple's face became even more red and her clothes suddenly fell off, revealing half of her body. Wang Lin's brows furrowed. He waved his sleeves and the woman's clothes went back on her body. He then looked at her with a very cold gaze. The female disciple felt a cold pressure around her. Her expression immediately changed and she knelt on the ground in fear. After a long time, she carefully stood up. She was very afraid because she didn't know what she had done to anger her master. At this moment, the second disciple finished cultivating. He looked at the female disciple but didn't say anything. His hand moved again to form another ball of blood and began forming the blood veins once more. The second disciple had taken several hours to barely complete 9 blood veins. Most of this time was spent cultivating to adjust his body. It was clear that producing this ice sculpture took a toll on him. When the ice sculpture was finished, the second disciple took a deep breath, knelt down before the ice sculpture, and began to mutter a prayer. Then he stood up, clenched his teeth, and pointed at the gathering point of the 9 blood veins. After a bang, the second disciple coughed out blood and was sent flying more than 10 feet away. As for the ice sculpture, the 9 blood veins moved like snakes. Then 2 of the blood veins touched and the ice sculpture exploded into pieces of ice. The second disciple's face was pale and he shamefully said, "Disciple has failed again." Wang Lin didn't bother with the disciple but stared at the ice sculpture. He searched the cultivator's memories for the key part of producing the ice sculptures. Just at this moment, Wang Lin noticed something. He looked up and saw a sword quickly flying toward this direction. This video will end here. Thank you for watching.